Hi, I'm Leonie Jackson from World Into Words, a writer and journalist.
And I'm Catherine Morgan, an investment broker from Talking Money.
We're getting together today to discuss an article that's actually just recently appeared on Talking Money's website, that's talkingmoney.co, in case anyone would like to read the article in full. We're getting together to discuss BTR, Build to Rent, the build to rent market, a little bit about what makes it different, and Catherine's going to give us some of her expertise and insight into that's the BTR sector. So I think what would be helpful, first of all, for those that don't know anything, as I didn't to start with, about BTR, Build to Rent, can you just perhaps describe what it is?
Absolutely. So build to rent is a way of constructing property in a specific way that is going to end up with people renting it. Simple as that, really. It's a way of constructing a home or groups of homes in units, typically in units and towers. And it's become a thing, it's become in vogue when you hear people talking about types of different property. It's typically in city centres, and it's typically describing the way that developers are now looking at how they can offer housing to these councils who, as we know, are all strapped. They've got these housing targets they can't meet.
Well, it's a massive housing crisis, isn't there? Something that we're all hearing about. I think it's be quite interesting to hear your take on how Build to Rent specifically would address that, because we know that there's a supply and demand issue. Developers just can't get housing out there on the market quick enough to meet the demand. And of course, that has an awful effect on prices rising, and people are priced out of the being able to purchase their own homes. So some of the research we've been doing behind the scenes for the article is how Build to Rent specifically addresses the issue with lack of housing.
Well, I suppose it does, in that we know they say there's not enough homes. So if you can build a large number of units, very specifically for the target market that you know is looking for homes, and in Britain, a big category would be first-time buyers, so youngish people looking for a first home. Then you're more likely to be onto a winner. It's the shortage of housing that is driving this. There just aren't enough new homes being built. It can't keep up with demand.
No, and as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Build to Rent actually get the housing to the market quicker. Why is that?
I suppose it does, because we'll come in and talk about the sort of who buys these things later. But essentially, when you're building, the whole set of units is sold kind of fait accompli as one purchase, and so you haven't got this phasing and the need to kind of release things to the market, and estate agents, as we've probably all seen, trying to get people to buy waves of or phases of new builds.
Yeah, of course. It's staggered release to keep the prices where they need them to be.
Yeah, and it's always known in advance that the whole lot are going to be available to the rental market. So it's a different dynamic in that respect. But when you were saying about what's fueling this, I mean, we talk in the article about the shortage of houses. We also talk about the underlying increase in house prices, which is why a lot of those first-time buyers, to stay with that category, can't buy their own home.
No, they'd need to save for 10 years minimum in order to do so.
Exactly. So that's why they're also renting. So it's twofold actually why there are likely to be many takers in rental terms for these units.
I think it's interesting as well, the perception of the rental market, and I think that's something that we definitely should talk about here. But I've personal experience of that. In a way, we need to lose our obsession with owning property, because it's just not practical for some of the kind of millennials and young people now. They can't.
Do you think they want to, though? I mean, do you think millennials aspire to the way that we did?
I would have said no. I would have said logically that it's so difficult for them to save and get those deposits together, and it can be so far out of reach for those beginning their career that rental would seem to be an attractive option without the strain of trying to take on a mortgage. But my own experience of my adult daughters is twofold, really. It's first of all, they do still see rental as a bit of a waste of money. There is still that, that perception that's hard to shake, that it's just money down the drain and they're not going to have anything to show for it in 20 years' time. but also their experience of renting is, the negative perception that we'll no doubt talk about that Build to Rent addresses, which is of, greedy landlords that are happy to take their monthly rental, slow to come and fix problems, lots of additional costs left to them to cover, which is,
like the quality of the rental stock then is pretty poor.
Yeah, and houses that aren't necessarily made, to be rented. They were people's purchased homes that are being rented out by a private landlord, and they don't have much interest in the tenants' comfort, safety, or whatever. And certainly one of my daughters ended up taking numerous days off work to get something fixed, and some of the cost fell to her. And so, unfortunately, with that bad experience, it's going to be very hard to change their perception.
So that's why she thinks renting is kind of as you say, like throwing money away.
Absolutely,
But I would challenge, well, I get that because I hear that too, but I also think when you look at, say, how millennials spend money, I don't know, Netflix subscription, mobile phone subscription, you don't expect to get something at the end of it. You are parting with your money in return for service.
You are.
And I guess if you're renting a home, that's what you're getting.
But they're not getting the service. So I think what will turn their minds around is to see for themselves the opportunity where the reasons I try to promote rental to them, which is that, if your boiler breaks down, in theory, you don't have to suddenly find £3,000. Yep. But that's not been their experience nor that of their friends. So I think in order to change that mindset, they would need to see the version that I tried to describe to them, which is, a nice
about quality and service.
Absolutely right. And I think this is what we're hoping to raise the profile of Build to Rent, and why, how Talking Money are involved, because this is a better way, as long as the service is provided.
Sure. Well, so maybe we should talk about, try and sort of paint a picture for listeners of a Build to Rent site.
Definitely.
A place to live, compared to, say, I'm going to use extremes here, but for anyone who used to watch Rising Damp, which was the horrible landlord who didn't really care two hoots about his tenants.
Yeah.
Imagine, say, just a house that's been converted into 3 flats. So you've still probably got maybe one boiler, and you've got one stopcock, got, I don't know, quite poor noise prevention insulation between the flats. And that's what I think what you meant about houses that were purchased homes that are poorly adapted.
Yeah.
And then compare that to, say, a larger building where, for a start, you're going to meet other people like you, because there's lots of units. So for the first time, you have the concept of a community, which I think is key.
I think this is what's fantastic. That's, for young people to be going into, and it's not just, not just for young people, but we were talking about that demographic, for young people to be going into a purpose-built building where there's communal areas, where they have their peers, and that kind of community spirited living and support is a much better image for me than my children as they grow up going into a grotty rental with a landlord that doesn't care.
And so let's talk about, again, for listeners, sort of building that picture. Build to Rent typically, because it started more in the US, and there's some interesting models in Germany, but in the UK it's still relatively new, this whole concept.
Took a while to come across, didn't it?
Yeah, but we have the criteria or the need for it in our most urban areas, so London, but also Manchester, Birmingham, Leeds, Newcastle. We're now even seeing it in Luton, and I can bring that to life with one of the developments that Talking Money is helping with. Big urban areas with proximity to a place where people go for work, so good employment, relatively cheap transport links, a large number of people who are within the working age. These are all the factors that lead to a developer thinking, right, there's a site I could actually build to rent. Usually there's a council who's already kind of identified some quite detailed housing targets, so they're playing to a need that's known, and that's where these things have worked really well. And we're probably a few years on now from these things, some of the early ones having been constructed, and there's communities that exist with tenancies of much longer times, because if you like where you're living, why wouldn't you want to sign up?
Well, this is the purpose, isn't it? This is the idea, really, is that it's an attractive place to live, that it's not just a stopover before you go on to purchase. We're talking about tenancies of potentially 10, 12, 15 years.
Yeah, that's the end goal.
Yeah.
And so you would take a tenancy in a place like this because it will give you not just your own unit, which obviously it's about your own apartment,
your own home,
it will have bigger communal spaces. So literally, if we think about the developer, they're building a thing that is specifically for people who are there renting, and they want to encourage them to be in that building, enjoy being in that building, probably spend time in the amenities
Yeah.
and buy the services. So you might see a gym, you might see a library on site, you may even see a creche. There's a couple that I know of in Manchester that are offering a creche on site.
Right, okay.
Gardens on the roof, which, hey, you're in the middle of a city, but you can go upstairs and, there's a garden there, allotments, people growing vegetables. This isn't wacko crazy stuff. This is now happening.
It's real.
I think that's exciting. That's going to attract people to stay there,
Absolutely. I think one thing I read which kind of really resonated with me is the difference is the idea is that it's somewhere to call home. It's somewhere that you feel really is your home rather than you paying to live in somebody else's own space. And I think that's quite a powerful message, a simple but powerful message to those considering it.
So we also said that we would probably give some examples. I mean, we're at Talking Money, we've been involved in helping this site in Luton, and I won't go into too much detail about the project to identify it anyway, but except to say that, how has it worked? Well, the council in Luton are looking for a large number of houses to be built.
Right.
They've also got sites in the city that are knackered, need refurbishing, or perhaps need demolishing and resiting. So where a developer can work with a council, as I said, you're already playing into an existing need.
So they already know that area needs to be developed or demolished.
It's a case of how many units, not will I get units. So if you were a one-man band landlord trying to perhaps build a house in the garden, who would know whether you'd be successful? These are big schemes of, hundreds of units. In fact, Luton, they'll be going for probably about 600 units over a couple of tower blocks.
Right, okay.
With, some great gardens, some great amenity, probably some retail units on the ground floor, very close to a station. It's a whole scheme that's been built.
So where is this? At what stage is this at?
It's at the planning stage, really.
Okay.
So, Talking Money is helping with some of the money loaned by our private investors to the developer to purchase. It's not a complete planning risk, it's a very informed risk, and we're talking about, as I said, how many apartments will the planning officer grant, not will he allow a development. There is no question.
No.
It's in the town plan. It's a foregone conclusion that there's going to be residential units. So for our investors, it's a fairly well educated risk to take, and the developer will then go forward, get planning, and then construct that. The interesting thing, and the article talks about this, is what will happen is instead of having to sell every unit through an estate agent, that developer is looking for one purchaser.
This is another key difference, isn't it?
And they will start early on. So once they know that they can buy it and they've got the funding to buy it and construct it, they're also then thinking about who's going to buy it. And you see this thing called forward funding, which is quite common, where somebody, and usually a large organisation, could be a private family, it could be a pension fund, is looking to buy real estate assets, and they will buy in, or they'll commit and sign the contract early on during the construction phase. And you imagine being a developer and knowing you've already got that in the bag.
Yeah, instead of having to sell individual units off plan or the pressure that way. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a bigger transaction to negotiate, but at the end of the day, I mean, people talk about Brexit and so on. These developments are still being forward purchased. And really, you don't need to worry about Brexit, because within the internal economy in Britain, people still need houses, as we've said.
Yeah.
They can't afford to buy. So people putting up these kind of developments, assuming they can find the forward purchase, are not at the mercy of that sort of sales cycle.
No. So I'm interested in the Luton project in particular. I think we've said, haven't we, at some point we'd really like to do a little tour, and perhaps we can move ourselves onto a video at some point and go and have a look.
That would be good as it goes up.
Good to show people what these amenities are like and how it really works. But I'm interested to know your involvement with Luton and what how the plans are shaping up.
So I think the site is very, very close to being acquired. Planning usually can take months on something like this. There are so many different studies that have to be conducted. There's consultation with various things like the Highways Agency. If it's near the railway, then so on and so on. It's a huge iterative process. The number of units has to be discussed. The density, if it's towers, which this will be. There's a huge amount of work to be done. And actually, most of these developments are in big city centres, so you've got some quite, you'd appreciate sort of architectural concerns, the look and the feel of the building.
Yeah, rightly so.
What quarter is it in? You know, London, Manchester, Leeds, they all have different quarters, so you know, a developer has to be really attuned to that. And it's no small feat. You know, these are big developers. You've got to have deep pockets to be able to employ the designers, the engineers. And there are companies, as we talked about in researching the article, who are now expert in this. They are build-to-rent experts. They design these things, or they're build-to-rent operators, so the people who actually then manage those buildings once they're up. You know, this is, as we said, a sector that is now evolving, and there are more and more competitors in there to help developers.
Yeah, it's interesting as well because some of the, for example, the pension funds, the big players in the pension world, such as Aviva or Granger,
LNG,
absolutely. Some of them will actually then take on managing that development. Others will bring in a third party. Yeah. But from everything I've been researching and everything I've read, it's that management is absolutely key to delivery for the end user, so that the experience of living in build to rent really is as hassle-free and community-spirited as they would have us believe. And I think lessons have been learnt in the early years of BTR development as to what people need to want to stay and to want to call it home.
And at the end of the day, for the people buying it, so let's say it's Aviva and they've bought a site, if it's not managed well, then there isn't going to be the certainty of the income stream.
No.
And why are they buying? Because it is an asset like anything else. You know, pension funds have pension savers' money in lots of different things. Stocks and shares, for example, bonds, gold. Property, or real estate as we call it, it is no different. It's a class of asset. And now that they're beginning to buy build to rent for that income stream, that rental that they're going to get.
Because it's not just the rental income either, is it? It's also income from the other amenities and services on site, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So, yeah, we should have said that. You know, it could be gym subscription, it could be restaurant takings and so on.
Yeah.
But it's really important that that is well managed because the company buying it is buying it for the income stream. So it's in their interest to make sure that that is properly managed.
Absolutely, because the residents will soon take to social media if it isn't, and the reputation of that particular development can suffer. So,
yeah, absolutely, yeah. So, I mean, I think we've probably covered a lot about why the end purchasers buy it, what's in it for the developers, and it's important, I guess, we highlight it's only going to be the larger developers that can afford to even buy these large sites. And I think it'll be really interesting to see whether the young, the target market, you know, whether they fill up these things, you know, whether there are units left vacant. We saw that a lot of buildings that were for retail sales that were built and put up in the noughties, for example, were empty. There were quite a few overseas buyers, but nobody living in them. It'll be really interesting to see when these big cities are, I guess, flooded with build-to-rent offerings, whether people do actually come.
Yeah, how quickly they're occupied.
And in the outturn, you know, how long people do stay.
And also, I guess, whether they can widen that demographic to be attractive to other people, because, as you say, the obvious market are young people that can't, you know, aren't in a position to get onto the property ladder. But, you know, communal living in a purpose-built rented space like that is something that I could see, if it's done well, could attract other demographics.
Yeah, I think there's people who are transient for some reason. I don't necessarily mean sort of migrant refugees. I mean just people who are divorcing and they need to move out for a while, or people who are downsizing, or somebody's lost a partner, they've got to sell the house, or there's
moving
always
areas for work, or
absolutely. I mean, there's a million and one reasons why there will always be tenants in the world. You know, even if you have the money, there are lots of people who choose to rent for a while. So. In terms of what Talking Money has been able to do,
you beat me to my next question.
never one to miss a pitch.
Go for it.
Well, you know, Talking Money as a brokerage, what we do is we introduce high net worth individuals to lending opportunities. So once we know that they qualify, we talk to them about lending money to, for example, property companies. And Luton's an example, but we have several others where that early stage, getting the cash together to enable a developer to buy the site and maybe paying for some of the legal costs, VAT, other things.
Yeah,
that is a thing that we do. And you know, so investors can, if they want to, get kind of hands-on experience of this sector, staying in the property sector, but getting into the new areas of the UK property market that are now in vogue. Yes, that's our angle as Talking Money. But I think we've covered the tenant angle, the developer angle, the end purchaser, and it's a really interesting sector to watch.
It is. I've certainly understood a great deal more about it from the work we've been doing together, and I'm hoping that people listening to this will, perhaps it raises more questions than it answers, or perhaps it just raises the topic in general, which is something that I think we're going to hear more and more about.
Yeah, we love feedback. If you violently disagree, or if you live in a build to rent and it's shocking and the landlord never does anything,
then tell us about it.
No, we're wrong.
We'll put it on our next podcast.
Brilliant.
No, it's great. It's really good to talk it through. I know we've got a few more topics in the planning stages. We think we're going to be doing some work on sustainability projects. Might be our next one. So watch this space for that one. But just helping with your shameless plugging, go over to talkingmoney.co. That's talkingmoney.co. You can read the full article there, and obviously get in touch, have a chat with Catherine if it's something you'd like to know more about. But it's been good.
Leonie.
Thanks for your time too, and here's the next one.
Cheers.